faith, firearms, and freedom. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio. This is episode 26, and I am your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran. This week's episode brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, cooksholsters.com. I was in North Carolina last week visiting family, and I was away from the Armed Lutheran studio, so I was planning to air a kind of best of show this week. But needless to say, that idea went right out the window on Thursday night in Dallas. I had dinner with my mom. We sat down to watch a movie afterwards. Decided to watch American Sniper. Neither one of us had seen it before, so thought we would sit down and watch that, spend a little extra time together. My wife and daughter piled into bed after a long day visiting family and friends. I worked all week. It was a working vacation for me. And I got a text from my wife at 9:48 Eastern Time. It said, "Call me." And then another immediately afterwards with a screen capture from a Facebook post showing a Dallas police officer face down in the street next to his patrol car. And my heart sank. Police officers in Dallas protecting a Black Lives Matter protest were ambushed in a calculated attack by black men who hated whites and white cops in particular. The news at that point was reporting 2 dead. I was scrambling around for more information, trying to reach out to Sergeant Bill to find out if his wife and if he and his wife were okay. 20 minutes later, I finally heard that they were. The police in Dallas ran toward the gunfire to protect people who hate them, as those people ran for cover and looked to those policemen for help. Quite the irony, don't you think? As the night wore on and the news got worse and worse, 5 officers were dead, 11 wounded, 2 innocent civilians wounded, several suspects in custody. One finally was surrounded and then blown up by a remote-controlled robot, the kind of robot, they send in to detonate suspicious packages. Black lives splatter. I'm heartbroken. It took me a while to process the news. I couldn't sleep. I had to get up and work the next morning, and I was probably awake till 5 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't settle down. I couldn't sleep. Society is on the brink of collapse. The barbarians are no longer at the gates. They're inside. They're among us. The Democrat Party, the president, the media that perpetrates the myth of America's endemic racism. Every time police shoot a black suspect, the knee-jerk reaction has been to blame cops as the greatest threat to black men in America, ignoring the reality of black-on-black crime and the vast disparity of the number of crimes committed by blacks, despite the fact that they make up such a small percentage of the population. The president's anti-police rhetoric started early in his first term, and with every incident, he's fanned the flames of racial resentment and division by opening his mouth and speaking before he knows any of the facts. From Trayvon Martin to the latest shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana, it's always about race, and whites are always to blame. As a result, we got riots in Ferguson, riots in Baltimore, protests and violence across the country. And in response, police are backing off. They're more hesitant to act. And who can blame them? I mean, one wrong move with a smartphone camera and the media watching them, and a police officer's life or career can be over. And rather than receiving much needed tactical training to help them cope with these split-second decisions that can end lives and careers, they're taught racial sensitivity. As a result, homicide in America's 50 largest cities spiked 17% in 2015. In gun control meccas like Chicago, the murder rate is double what it was last year. And as I've said this before, police can't protect you. They have no obligation to do so. The Supreme Court has ruled they don't have an obligation to risk their lives to save you. And Sergeant Bill and any police officer you talk to will tell you they rarely, if ever, arrive on time to stop a crime. Thanks to what some call the Ferguson effect, they're less and less likely to want to stick their necks out. And violence is increasing. The message from the President and the Department of Justice encourages blacks to resist police, to disrespect them. And now that's resulted in the largest single loss of police lives since 9/11. The assassinations of police by the supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement are nothing short of attacks on civilization itself. And it's high time we recognize that if we don't stand up to this madness, the country is going to return to the levels of violence and chaos that we saw in the 1960s and 1970s, when urban areas were abandoned to their fates by those who could get out. So-called white flight that resulted from uncontrolled violence in those major cities, it lasted 30 years until serious law enforcement efforts and the spread of concealed carry in the 1990s began a 25-year drop in crime and a revitalization of America's urban areas like New York City. But that's changing. The election of America's first black president was expected by many to usher in this new era of racial harmony and unity. But that's been an utter failure. Those who paid attention to who Barack Obama really is knew it would be. And now we're on the brink of a return to the violence of 30 years ago. And I, for one, don't think this is by accident. Call me a tinfoil hat conspiracist, but I don't think this is accidental. This chaos and violence, this racial division, creates a sense of fear and urgency that allows the government to assume control over more and more of American life, as fearful Americans, ignorant Americans, look to government for protection and become more and more willing to give up liberty in exchange for the promise of security. Racial division ensures that the black vote will continue to be over 90% Democrat, as the president's party promises every 2 years to make things better, to get even with the white man. But things never change. If they did, why would anybody vote for them? Stoking the flames of racial division allows the Justice Department to exert control over local police in the name of racial justice. And a couple of weeks ago when we had the roundtable, go back and listen to that episode 23, talking about the aftermath of Orlando, and listen to the roundtable at the end, and listen to Sergeant Bill talk about the difficulty of being a police officer now as a result of the changes. Accepting a certain level of violence allows the government to push for more and more gun control. The ultimate goal is not eliminating violence, it's eliminating the Second Amendment. The proof of all this is in the president's own words. Even as he condemned the attack in Dallas and claimed to mourn the unprecedented loss of police lives, he continued to give voice to the movement that promotes and celebrates the killing of police, Black Lives Matter. He couldn't even express his sympathy for the officers who were killed and wounded without also suggesting that the shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana were racially motivated. As usual, he did it with no evidence whatsoever. He continues to promote the racial divide so he and his party can profit politically. Those of you who voted for Obama thinking he could heal the racial divide in this country, those of you who just couldn't hold your nose and vote for Romney, who said there's no difference between Romney and Obama back in 2012, there's no difference between Republicans and Democrats, and you stayed home, this mess is on you. The mess we are in is on you. Don't do it again in 2016. Pray for Dallas. Pray for the families of the victims, those who are wounded. Pray for all of our first responders all across the country as they get up every day, put on the badge, and face an increasingly hostile nation. And pray for the future of our nation. Then go out and buy a gun. Get some ammo. Pay for some good training. Gun up America, because it's only going to get worse.
I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran Radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safer.
Welcome back to this special episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Kind of a last-minute, thrown-together episode. Like I said, I completely changed my plans for this episode at the end of the week. I had put together a best-of episode. I had everything parsed and all the production work done, and I was ready. And then Thursday happened, running over into Friday morning, and everything changed. And here I am. At the time of this recording, it's Monday morning, 5 hours before release of the show, and I'm changing gears. I couldn't go forward with what I had originally planned and not talk about Dallas and everything that's happened. One of the two recent police shootings, the one with the most questions, or the ones that I have the most questions about, is that of Philandro Castile in Minnesota. Castile, it appears, was a concealed carry permit holder who was stopped by police for a broken taillight. Now, that's a common excuse for stopping suspicious drivers. The Black Lives Matter crowd would claim that the broken taillight is just another name for driving while black. But I'm not black, and I've been stopped for this reason. I live in a community in North Texas that has a minuscule black population, and yet it happened to me. One night, coming home from a very late night at work, I rolled through my small town of 6,000 people well after midnight, pushing 1 o'clock in the morning, and got pulled over for this very reason. Had a tail light out. The cop didn't give me a ticket. He just told me to get the light fixed. He said, actually, he was looking for drunks. And I wasn't drunk, so he sent me on my merry way. There's not a lot of traffic in our town after midnight, obviously, and so seeing somebody out late at night with a broken taillight got the attention of the local cop on duty that night. Well, it turns out Philandro Castile may have resembled a suspect in an armed robbery, so the taillight excuse may have just been employed to stop and question him. And from what we understand at this point, Castile informed the officer that he was a concealed carry permit holder, he had a gun, and as he reached for his driver's license and a carry permit, the officer shot him. His girlfriend, sitting next to him in the driver's seat, live streamed video of the aftermath, including the police saying, "I told him not to touch it," and Philandro Castile's tragic final moments. The Second Amendment Foundation has called for an investigation into the Castile shooting, and I believe it's merited. But I suspect I know what happened here. From what I've pieced together, it sounds like Castile was stopped because he looked like a suspect in a violent crime. He informed the cop he had a gun, and then reached for his ID. It looks like a tragic miscommunication, where a law-abiding citizen sent the wrong signals to the police, and the police officer overreacted. Well, as in all tragic incidents, there are lessons to be learned here. The first thing you got to understand is that officers approaching your vehicle have every reason to be suspicious and alert. They relax at their own risk. It's not uncommon for police to be shot and killed while approaching a vehicle at a traffic stop. You may think it's unfair, but they're probably even more nervous when approaching a black male, given all the violence. Not surprising. Like it or not, black men commit a vastly disproportionate amount of crime in this country. They commit 8 times as many homicides as whites and Hispanics combined. That's not racism, that's reality. A police officer is 18 times more likely to be shot by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by a white cop. So if you're a cop approaching a stopped vehicle, especially if the driver is black, naturally you would be extra careful. And thanks to the recent spate of police officers being targeted by black men, police are going to go the extra mile to be vigilant when approaching cars driven by black males. So how do you make sure, white or black, Hispanic, Asian, I don't care, how do you make sure that this situation doesn't get out of hand or escalate if you're pulled over by police? Well, you got to create a non-threatening environment for the police officer. You want to make sure that at no time does that police officer feel that his life is in danger. So how do you do that? Here's how. First, when the officer blue lights you, turn on your turn signal, slow down, and get off the road as quickly as possible. That'll show the officer that you're complying and you don't intend to flee. Next, pull off the road as far as possible. Give the officer plenty of room to approach you without stepping into traffic. Again, that makes the officer more comfortable. His adrenaline and apprehension levels are already high as he approaches your car. Having to worry about traffic whizzing by him will only make things worse. So again, trying to make things calm and comfortable. If you're listening to music, to quote Chris Rock, turn that shit off. Turn it off. Fourth, I've read and seen some videos of people suggesting that you turn your car off as well. That wouldn't hurt. It tells the officer that you're compliant, you have no intention to flee. So to go ahead and do that too. Fifth, and this one's probably most important, stay in your car. Whatever you do, don't open the door and get out. Wait for the officer to approach you. And the same goes for your passengers. Unless you're planning suicide by cop, stay in your car. If you've got darkened windows, roll them down. on the side from which the officers approach. If two officers and they approach both sides of the car, roll all the windows down. If the officer approaches from the passenger side behind you, roll down your window and the passenger side window behind you on that side where the officer can see into the car. He can see inside and feel comfortable that there are no surprises waiting for him behind that darkened glass. If it's at night, turn on the cabin lights inside the car. Again, that's going to help the officer identify what's inside, and it gives the appearance of compliance. Now, speaking of compliance, like I tell my kids, treat the officer with respect. He's in a position of authority, so respect and kindness will go a long way to reducing the officer's anxiety and improving your interactions with him or her. Remember the phrases, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. Keep your hands visible when the officer approaches. That's my 9th tip. On the steering wheel at 10 and 2 is a good start. Or 1 and 11. Whatever. Up on top of the steering wheel where he can see. For your passengers, make sure they put their hands where the officer can see them as well. Hands on their knees, that's a perfect spot. Have your license and registration handy when the officer comes to the window. This is a big one. And this is what I think went wrong with the Philandro Castile stop. Make sure as soon as you know that you're being pulled over, get your driver's license, your registration, your concealed carry license. Get them out, have them ready so that you're not digging around in your pockets when the officer comes up to the door, because that's just going to give the officer, that'll make, the officer has no idea what you're digging for. And he could rightly assume, as it appears maybe happened here with Philandro Castile, it could give him the impression that you're a threat. Now, some have suggested, get the license, set it on the dash. For me, I just keep it in my hands. When the officer arrives, I have it right there. I don't have to reach for it. I don't have to move anything. I've got my hands on the steering wheel and my license and registration and CHL in my hand. So I would recommend not carrying your license in your back pocket when you drive. Just to make it easier, keep it in the front pocket, a shirt pocket, in the console, somewhere where it's easy to reach, easy to get to, in a way that's not threatening. Reaching for your pocket, especially if it's in, if you're sitting on your wallet and you reach back behind you, it looks like you're reaching for a gun. This is where, a lot of people carry a concealed weapon at 3 or 4 o'clock. So this is the biggest don't that I can think of. Don't reach back there to get your license. If you do still have your license in your pocket when the officer arrives at your window, if you forget, then I would inform the officer when he asks license and registration. I would let the officer know right there where it's located before reaching it. And say something like, "Officer, my license is in my back pocket. May I retrieve it?" Once they acknowledge that, then remove your hand from the steering wheel, get your wallet, okay? Again, this is all to make sure that the officer is not threatened. Now, if you've got a CHL or a license to carry, present that to the officer with your license. Now, there are some states that don't require you to declare this information to the police. I prefer to do it anyway. Some states don't require it, like Minnesota, where Philandro Castile was killed. Some states require that you declare your firearm to the officer. Some don't. I would prefer to eliminate any doubt on the part of the officer, because when they get your license, they're going to go back to their vehicle. They're going to find out that you're a concealed carry permit holder anyway. So make sure. So I prefer just to be up front Officer, here you go. But if you're going to inform the officer, especially if you're informing the officer of the presence of a gun, you got to do it in a way that doesn't raise the officer's level of fear or suspicion. Don't blurt out that you have a gun, as Philandro Castile may have done in this case. We're not sure, but I've read some things that suggest that may be what happened. My experience has been that the officer will probably ask you if you have your gun with you in the car. And my standard response is always, yes, sir, it's on my right hip. Or, yes, sir, it's in the glove compartment. Something like this. Be calm, be forthcoming. Let them know where it is, but don't ever reach for it unless you're instructed to do so. Make sure that, yes, sir, yes, Mr. Police Officer, the firearm is on my right hip. And then leave your hands where the officer can see them. Now, if you live in a constitutional carry state, this is going to be a little different. Offer your driver's license and then inform the officer that you're exercising your right to carry a concealed firearm. This is a little tough. Obviously, you don't have to announce this to the police, but you could. And if you do, explain it in this non-threatening way. Mr. Officer, sir, I am exercising my Second Amendment right to carry a concealed firearm. And again, like I said, my experience has been that they will probably ask where it is. And you just tell them respectfully. If you're in a constitutional carry state and you don't have an obligation legally to inform the officer, I wouldn't even bring it up. Once you've handed your IDs to the officer, return your hands to the steering wheel immediately and keep them there. Don't get lazy with your hands and put them in places where the officer can't see them, especially when the officer goes back to his vehicle, as he will, to write up the ticket, to pull your records to make sure you're not some kind of a escaped felon or something. Then when he comes back, make sure your hands are back at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel again. Okay? If you're filming the encounter with the police, politely inform the officer that you're doing so. Don't make it confrontational. Know the law. This is a biggie. Know the law and do not refuse any lawful command. Respectfully comply with any lawful command that the police officer gives you. Don't refuse any unlawful command, however, in a confrontational manner. For example, if the officer orders you out of the vehicle, which they can't do unless they have a warrant, or if they say, we're going to search your vehicle. No, I'm sorry, you're not. Politely state your objections, but remain compliant. Mr. Officer, sir, I'm sorry, but I do not consent to search of my property. Now, if they don't back down and they become more confrontational at this point, don't offer them any physical resistance. Don't put your hands on the officer, unless, of course, you're wanting to get tased or shot. Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Alton Sterling, they all refused to comply and they were forcibly detained. Brown assaulted a police officer. Garner became aggressive and non-compliant. Sterling resisted after being tased even. Physically resisting arrest or detention is a good way to escalate a police encounter to lethal force, and you don't want that. At the end of the day, you want to get back on the road and reach your destination safely. The police officer does too. So remaining calm, being respectful and compliant will go a long way to making sure that that happens for both of you.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
So you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can buy in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cooks holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside waistband carry. They carry a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster from cooksholsters.com.
For this final segment, I had wanted to see if I could get Sergeant Bill to come in and talk about his experience in law enforcement and his experience with this recent shooting. Bill, understandably, has been very busy. When I contacted him today, he was back at Police HQ for another protest. Nothing like going to work to protect people who hate you and who, some of whom tried to kill your coworkers and friends just a couple of days earlier. And what I came across, something I wanted to share with you. It was a post I found on Facebook from a Palm Beach County police officer named Jay Stalien. And this guy gets it. He's got a compelling story, and he backs it up with facts and statistics. But beyond the facts, this is heartbreaking. It's a window inside the life of a black police officer. He says, I used to be so torn up inside growing up. Here I am, a young African American born and raised in Brooklyn, wanting to be a cop. I watched and lived through the crime that took place in the hood, my own black people killing others over nothing. It never sat right with me, he says. I wanted to help my community and stop watching the blood of African Americans spilled on the streets at the hands of fellow black men. So he became a cop because black lives in his community, he says, along with all lives, mattered to him. He wanted to help stop the bloodshed. I woke up every morning, he says. I put on my freshly pressed uniform, shined my badge, function checked my weapon, kissed my wife and kid, and waited for my wife to say the same thing she always does before I leave. Make sure you come back home to us. And I always replied, I will. But the truth was, I was never sure if I would. I almost lost my life on this job, he says. And every call, every stop, every moment that I had this uniform on was another possibility for me to almost lose my life again. I was a target in the very community I swore to protect and the very community that I wanted to help. My own fellow black men and women were attacking me, wishing for my death, wishing for the death of my family. I was so confused, so torn. I couldn't understand why my own people would turn against me, when every time they called, I was there. Every time someone died, I was there. Every time they were going through one of the worst moments in their lives, I was there. So why was I their enemy? The more I listened, the more I realized. I would ask questions, and I would only get emotional responses and inferences based on no facts. The more killing I saw, the more tragedy, the more savagery, the more violence, the more loss of life of a black man at the hands of another black man, the more I realized. I haven't slept well in the past few nights. Heartbreak weighs me down. Rage flows through my veins and tears fill my eyes. I watched my fellow officers assassinated on live television, and the images of them laying on the ground are seared into my brain forever. I couldn't help but wonder, he says, if it had been me, a black man, a black cop, on TV, assassinated, lying on the ground dead, would my friends and family still think Black lives mattered? Would my life have mattered? Would they make t-shirts in remembrance of me? He asks. Would they go on TV and protest violence? Would they even make a Facebook post or share a post in reference to my death? All of my realizations came to this conclusion, he says. Black lives do not matter to most black people. Now remember, this is coming from a black cop. Only the lives that make the national news matter to them, he says. Only the lives that are taken at the hands of cops or white people matter. The other thousands of lives lost, the other black souls that I, along with every cop, have seen taken at the hands of other blacks do not matter. Their deaths are unnoticed, accepted as the norm, and swept underneath the rug by the very people who claim and post Black Lives Matter. I realized that this country is full of ignorance, where an educated individual will watch the ratings-driven news media and watch a couple of YouTube video clips and then come to the conclusion that they have all the knowledge that they need to have in order to know what it feels like to have a bulletproof vest as part of your office equipment and stay alive as part of your daily to-do list. I realized that there are even cops, he says in caps, duly sworn law enforcement officers who are supposed to be decent investigators, who will publicly go on the media and call other white cops racist and KKK based on a video clip that they watched thousands of miles away, which was filmed after the fact, based on a case where the details aren't even known yet and the investigation hasn't even begun. Is he right or is he right? He's definitely right. Thanks to YouTube videos, millions of Americans are now experts in law enforcement training and use of force. People will see a 30-second video and think they know everything about a shooting. They'll hear what somebody said they heard or somebody said they saw, take it as gospel, like the hands up, don't shoot lie, and they'll turn it into truth. Jay Stalien continues in his Facebook post, and like I said, this is absolutely right on. I realize that most in the African American community refuse to look at solving the bigger problem that I see and deal with every day, which is black on black crime taking hundreds of innocent black lives each year, and instead focus on the 9 questionable deaths of black men where some were in the act of committing crimes. This is an argument I got into on Twitter. Remember I said I couldn't sleep the night of, or the morning of after the shooting in Dallas. And to my great shame, I turned to Twitter, and there were things posted that just absolutely crawled all over me, ticked me off. And like I say, to my great shame, I stooped to saying some things that I shouldn't have. But there were people who were immediately jumping to the gun control issue, who were refusing to accept the problem of violent crime in the black community, who were spewing the racist BS that Black Lives Matter puts out. And my argument, my main argument, as is always my argument when these people were talking about guns, was it has nothing to do with the guns. It has nothing to do with the inanimate objects. It has to do with the men who hold those guns. Their hearts, their minds, their lack of morality, their lack of value, the lack of value placed on human life. When it becomes easy to kill somebody, when it becomes easy to see another person, a black man, a white man, a cop, as somebody of lesser value, somebody whose life has no value to you, when that becomes the norm, we're in trouble as a society. Jay Stalien continues. He says, I realize that they value the life of a sex offender and convicted felon more than the lives of the innocent cops who were assassinated in Dallas, protecting the very people that hated them the most. That's the great irony. I realize that they refuse to believe that most cops dread the thought of having to shoot someone, and they never see the turmoil and mental anguish that a cop goes through after having to kill someone to save his own life. Instead, they believe that we're all bloodthirsty killers because the media says so, even though the numbers prove otherwise. I realize that they truly feel as if the death of cops will help people realize the false narrative of Black Lives Matter. I realize that some of these people who say Black Lives Matter are full of hate and racism themselves. Hate for cops because of the false narrative that more black people are targeted and killed. Racism against white people for a tragedy that began hundreds of years ago when most of the white people today weren't even born yet. I realize that some in the African American community's idea of quote-unquote justice is the prosecution of any and every cop or white man that kills or is believed to have killed a black man, no matter what the circumstances are. I realize the African American community refuses to look within to solve its major issues and instead makes excuses and looks outside for solutions. I realize that a lot of people in the African American community lead with hate instead of love, division instead of unity, turmoil and rioting instead of peace. I realize that they have become the very entity that they claim they're fighting against. I realize that the very reasons that I became a cop are the very reasons that my own people hate me. And now in this toxic, hateful, racially charged political climate, I am now more likely to die. And it's still hard for me to understand to this day. Jay Stalien is a black police officer from Palm Beach County, Florida. Like I said, this is powerful. This is heartbreaking. It's an insight into the mentality of the thin blue line that stands between us and anarchy. What I fear is that thin blue line's not going to be enough. It's not about the guns. It's about the hate. It's about the heart of men who hate and are willing to kill. No amount of gun control or background checks or whatever stupid gun control legislation the Democrats come up with is going to make a difference when you're dealing with this kind of racist hatred. Till we can come together and recognize that we're not black, we're not white, we're American. Until that day comes, this isn't something that's going to be solved. And I don't see it changing anytime soon, no matter who wins in November. And I will keep praying for good young men like Jay Stalien, Bill Silvia, thousands and thousands of others across this country who get up and put on the badge every day and make up that thin blue line between civilization and savagery. God bless them. We need them more than ever. And that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Thank you for listening, downloading, and subscribing. If you heard something that you'd like to comment on, check out the feedback page at www.armedlutheran.us/feedback and send us an email or leave us a recorded message. Be sure to check out the show notes for some upcoming training opportunities with Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense, and use the promo code Lutheran when you register and you'll get a 20% discount off the regular price. I'm heading to the Iowa State IDPA Championship next weekend. Cook's Holsters is an official sponsor of the match, so I'll tell you all about that when I get back. Christ blessings on your week. Keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @ArmedLutheran and like us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/TheArmedLutheran. You can contact us by email at armedlutheranradio@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 855-54-ARMED. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.